We want Bitcoin to be secure against very, very powerful adversaries. And we don't just want Bitcoin to be secure if some random person on Twitter turns out to be right and quantum computers don't turn out to become a thing. If a quantum computer appears, then the entire banking system breaks down and we have much bigger problems. And I think this doesn't make sense. The world is migrating to post-quantum schemes, whether you see it or not. If we would just use the standardized signature scheme, hash-based, it would be 8,000 bytes. The effect of that is that fewer transactions fit into a block, fewer people can make transactions, potentially fees would go up quite significantly. Do they ever need more than 16 billion signatures for a single public key?
Hi everyone and welcome back to Stephan Livera podcast. Today we're going to be discussing a hot topic in Bitcoin circles today, which is quantum and what are the risks to it, how, and of course Jonas's work on this. Now, long-time listeners, you'll know who Jonas Nick is, but for new people, Jonas is working as part of the team. He is a cryptographer and Bitcoin researcher and developer. He's part of the team at Blockstream Research. He's been writing papers, and we're going to be discussing one in particular today, but I guess we'll talk a bit more broadly about it. And I guess also of note for listeners, Jonas is also a maintainer of libsecp 256k1. So he's a maintainer of one of the, let's say, a key library that relates to the cryptography that we already use in Bitcoin today. So just for listeners who are unaware. So Jonas, first off, welcome back to the show.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here.
So let's just start with a bit of your thoughts on, your thoughts as a cryptographer working in Bitcoin. How real is this risk? Like, I guess people want to get a sense of that because there's been a lot of talk recently about new advancements in the field of quantum computing and what does it mean for us. So can you give us just a bit of a broad overview there on your thoughts?
Right. So from my perspective, what we're doing in Bitcoin, right, we have these coins and we authorize coins using digital signatures. And those digital signatures, we believe them to be secure, and we even have security proofs that show that they are secure. And if you ever look into one of those cryptographic papers, maybe one day, and then you see, okay, there are these security theorems that precisely define what security means in that context, right? Now in Bitcoin, we use ECDSA or Schnorr signatures. And when we look into security theorems for those signature schemes, when they spell out exactly what the requirements are, they essentially say this scheme is secure as long as our elliptic curve that we depend on in Bitcoin is secure. The curve that we use in Bitcoin was chosen by Satoshi. It's called SECP256k1. Now, from my perspective, when I write security proofs like this and I write a theorem like this, then I write down this requirement and then I'm thinking to myself, the problem here is that we know that this elliptic curve is not secure. This has been known since the mid-90s after the invention of Shor's algorithm that would show you how to break the security of such a curve. The only thing that is missing would be this machine that is called a quantum computer. And that adds a little bit of unease when I write these kinds of papers. Then the question is it realistic whether a quantum computer appears or not? And in my opinion, it's very important that we think about this problem, how to secure Bitcoin against quantum computer, because we want Bitcoin to be secure against very, very powerful adversaries. And we don't just want Bitcoin to be secure if some random person on Twitter turns out to be right and quantum computers don't turn out to become a thing in the future. And this is what is motivating me to work on this problem.
Yeah. And so do you have any thought or research or anything you've looked at in terms of timelines, or you don't have any idea on what is realistic for a quantum computer that could break Bitcoin's cryptography?
The problem is that there doesn't seem to be a consensus on a timeline, and it seems to be very hard to predict these kinds of things. I mean, I am not losing sleep over it right now. I'm thinking more in a decade-long timeline or something like that, not as much in a 3 to 4 year timeline where Bitcoin would really be affected. But also, we still need to, assuming a quantum computer would appear in 10 years, then we still need time in between to migrate. And as we know in Bitcoin moves kind of slow. We need to prepare soft forks. We need to deploy those soft forks and do so securely. And all of that takes time too.
I see. And so, from what I've seen, you see the gamut of, there are people who think, oh, it's coming in a few years, and there are other like legitimate quantum computing experts who think it's like 20 years away, and then there's maybe some people who think it's just never happening, right? So I guess that's sort of the what the range of what you're seeing. Some people saying.
There are some really bad arguments, I think. The worst one that I see from like pretty regularly is if a quantum computer appears, then the entire banking system breaks down and we have much bigger problems. And I think this doesn't make sense. First of all, it's a non sequitur. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't secure Bitcoin. And also, it's just a fact that the world is migrating to post-quantum schemes, whether you see it or not. I mean, there are government bodies that mandate the use of post-quantum schemes. And if I use my SSH tool for non-techies, that's the tool you use to log into computers over a network. It will try to use a post-quantum scheme, and if the server doesn't support it because it has an old version, then it will print this giant version. Insecure, you're now using a non-quantum secure channel. And similarly, my current, like I'm just using standard Firefox, it also supports post-quantum secure communication channels via TLS. And if the server supports it, it will use it. So we're already using post-quantum signature schemes, and the world is moving towards it.
I see. Now, and I'm with you there, and I think it's perhaps also important to understand that it's easier to upgrade a centralized system like a banking system than it is to upgrade a decentralized system like Bitcoin. So that's something we also need to take into account. But I think perhaps what we have seen is some people who just think, hey, can't the devs just do something, just do it now kind of thing. But it's like, no, there's also actually trade-offs that would be required for us to actually do that. And we might have to pay a cost in some way.
There's a very important. Yeah, that's a very important point. I see this also all the time. Why haven't you done anything already? And the problem really is that there's no alternative in the post-quantum space that we could just use
for free per se.
Any post-quantum scheme that we will use will have some effects that will be visible to the users. They have downsides. There's a huge design space on possible upsides and downside, pros and cons that we can pick, but there's no scheme that we could just take that has exactly the same properties as the cryptographic schemes that we use right now.
Gotcha. Okay. So I'm going to do my best to try and offer a simple explanation of what we do today in Bitcoin. And you tell me if I'm getting anything wrong, but I'm going to try to offer that just for listeners who are, let's say, new and trying to understand what's going on here. So in Bitcoin today, maybe you can think of it like our private key is this massive, massive number. And in practice, when we go to spend Bitcoin, really what we're doing is we're kind of showing our public key and we're doing like a multiplication. We're signing a transaction and we're showing the public key and the signature. And I guess the point is, in classical computing world, I guess you're saying it's like it would take like billions of years to kind of reverse out that private key from the signature that, we post on chain. But in the hypothetical quantum world, with the use of Shor's algorithm, a quantum attacker, or once the so-called Q day happens, that attacker would be theoretically able to reverse out your private key from, what we're posting on chain now. Is that kind of a loosely fair summary of what's happening?
I think that's a pretty fair summary. I mean, still depends on what kind of quantum computers we'll see, how long the quantum computer will take to actually break this. And I think
got it.
Another
and that's probably a good point to explain the short range attacks and the long range attacks. So the idea is, if you have ever exposed your public key and there are certain output types that have their public key exposed, they are vulnerable to what's called a long range attack. Like right now, today, anyone can just download the chain, and the hypothetical quantum computer in the future could reverse out the private key for that. And then the short range attack is when, so let's say we broadcast our transaction and it goes into the mempool, and only in that short period of time when it's, let's say, in the mempools, before it gets confirmed into a block, that hypothetically the quantum attacker could like see your public key and the signature and try to reverse it out and steal it. But that's why it's a much higher bar for them to execute a short range attack versus just doing a long range attack.
Yes, that is right. And I think another interesting aspect that you mentioned is that we know in the classical computing world that it would take billion years to reverse a public key or to break a public key. And that is not really true. That is just an assumption that we make. So far, we don't know an efficient algorithm that would be able to break our elliptic curve, but we don't know whether one exists or not. It is just that no one has found such an algorithm so far. And
right, that can bring it to like a realistic time. I was researching a little bit. There's this, it's called Pollard's Row, but apparently it brings it from like 2 to the 256 down to like 2 to the 128. So it's like still like just basically impossible. But in the quantum world, as I'm reading, they're saying this idea is that the quantum computer would sort of bring it to, quote unquote, a polynomial time thing instead of being an exponential time thing. And that basically, computer science speak, as I'm reading, means it's now in the realm of possibility, as instead of basically very, very impossible or very, very, very unlikely. Yeah. Yeah.
But I was trying to say that another angle for this type of research is not just what do we do in case a quantum computer appears. It's also what do we do in case our curve is broken in the classical way. I think there's a low likelihood of that. Some people think there's a higher likelihood of that than a quantum computer actually appearing. But there's just this other angle at looking at this. What if the assumptions we use in Bitcoin just break down, even in the classical world? What can we do?
I see. So yeah, as you said, as I understand, then that it's possible that there can be classical breaks also. And then I guess another context-setting thing here is the estimate of coins currently vulnerable to what we said as long-range attacks. I think the last number I've seen people talk about is something like 5 or 6 million coins. Now, 1 million is rumored to be, Satoshi. Maybe Satoshi's dead, who knows? But there's a lot of address reuse and instances where the coins have already had their public key exposed. And so that's also just worth, understanding that there are a lot of coins already vulnerable today. Although maybe in the future, like if it started to be a real thing, then we would start to see people like move and migrate out. But what we're talking about then is that if a lot of people at least went into hashed address types, then they are now only vulnerable to the short range attack, not the long range attack.
Yep. Yeah, that is right. I mean, this is kind of touches upon one of the big questions, which is what to do with the coins that have not migrated to a post-quantum scheme. And fortunately, that's not a question that cryptography has an answer to.
Right. And so I guess as this paper gets at, is hash-based signature schemes for Bitcoin. So can you just set a bit of the context for us? What are the different categories here? So I presume, what we have now is an elliptic curve-based scheme. That's what we're using now, ECDSA or Schnorr. There's hash-based, and there's some other types. Can you just explain a bit about that?
Right. So I mentioned earlier that the security of the signature schemes we use today, they depend on an assumption that is that the curve is not broken. And we can design cryptography also on different assumptions. And the kind of assumptions we're looking at are assumptions that we believe to be hard still in in a post-quantum world. And one of those assumptions is that hashes are still secure against quantum computers, mainly that they are still collision resistant, or perhaps more easily, let's say you have a hash function. Maybe hash function gets some input and produces some output, the hash, and the hash is supposed to be some completely independent thing from the input, such that when you see the output, you cannot recompute the input except by just trying out all possible inputs. The quantum computer gets a little bit better at that, but not in the sense that the attack would become polynomial, as you mentioned before. So still not in the realm of actual physical possibilities. So hashes are one of the assumptions that we can look at. And the other big type of assumptions would be based on so-called lattices. And that's something some people have looked at it in the Bitcoin space, and there exist standardized schemes for lattices. But in our work so far, we have looked into hash-based signatures, and mainly for the reason that they are the most obvious candidate, because the assumption that hashes are secure is an assumption that is already in place in Bitcoin. We use hashes to identify transactions. We use hashes to identify blocks. So if hash functions weren't secure, we would have a bigger problem than just signatures being insecure, but rather we wouldn't even know what the best blockchain is. And we would have chain splits and so on. So that would be potentially even worse. And this assumption is relatively conservative. And also all the other signature schemes in the post-quantum world, at least the realistic ones, they also make use of hash functions. So if hash functions are broken, all of them are broken. But hash-based signatures also come with downsides for sure.
Got it. And so these are some of the So do you want to start walking us through some of the points you explore in this paper around hash-based schemes? Like, what are some of the categories of scheme, and what are some of the the upsides and the downsides of them?
Right. So first I should mention that these hash-based or post-quantum signature schemes, they sort of exist, and they have been standardized by National Institute of Standards and Technology, I think US thing. They exist, they are implemented, as I said, for example, in Firefox and in my SSH, but they have not been designed for the Bitcoin application. They have been designed for signing certificates in the web and for signing software releases. In the Bitcoin space, we have a little bit different requirements, and this is why we looked at how can we perhaps modify these standardized schemes that exist a little bit to make them better suited for the Bitcoin use case. This was one of the main questions we started out with when writing this paper.
Yeah, and so I guess in simple terms, the main downsides, as I'm reading and trying to understand, there's a few things, but it is about kind of the size of that transaction and the computational requirement, and then I guess this aspect of whether it's a stateful design or a stateless design, because that also has some other trade-offs for us in Bitcoin. So can you maybe give us like a rough sketch of that? Like, what would the trade-off space look like? Are we talking like much larger transaction sizes? Give us some sense of that.
Yeah, so our current Schnorr signatures are 64 bytes, and ECDSA signatures are about 70 bytes. Now, if we would just use the standardized signature scheme, hash-based, it would be 8,000 bytes. So that is
like 100x or more than 100x.
I believe it's about 10, 12, 13 transactions, like average transactions on the network, just with single signature. And the effect of that is that fewer transactions, fit into a block. Fewer people can make transactions. Potentially fees would go up quite significantly, or we would need to discuss a potential block size increase to support the same number of transactions as before. That's kind of the obvious downside that hash-based signatures have. And this is already, there are multiple versions of this standardized scheme. It's called SLH DSA, by the way, stateless hash-based digital signature algorithm, I believe. And there are two versions of this. One is called the fast version, which is fast for signing and verification, and the other one is called small version. And 8,000 bytes is already the small version. And we looked at, okay, can we somehow reduce the size of a hash-based signature scheme? And one of the main things we looked at, I mean, we weren't the first to think about this, but one of the characteristics in Bitcoin is that we usually want to avoid reusing addresses. So we generate an address, and that encodes our public key. We give it to the sender. Sender sends to this address, and then for the next sender, we try to generate a new address. And we do that for privacy reasons, to make it more difficult to link transactions on the chain. So the average number of signatures we produce for a single public key on Bitcoin, at least usual in the usual cases, is about between 1 and 2. Sometimes you will need to use, you sign a transaction and then it doesn't confirm, so you need to increase the fee, sign again.
Or there may be cases where you want to like prove ownership of an address,
right?
That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Or maybe you're using like Lightning-like payment channels where you sign a transaction very often. So there are cases where we sign more often, but I would say in the general case, we sign rarely. Now these hash-based signatures, we can reduce them significantly by putting a limit on the number of times you can sign with a single public key. So we can say, okay, with this public key, you can sign 16 billion times. If you sign more than 16 billion times, then an attacker will be able to potentially, or will be able with relatively little effort to forge a signature and steal your coin. So you must be below that limit. Now the question is, for regular users, do they ever need more than 16 billion signatures for a single public key? If we buy that assumption, then we can reduce the size from 8,000 bytes to 3,000 bytes, 4,000 bytes in that range. So that is one of the things where we applied this specific Bitcoin domain to the question of how to optimize these signature schemes. And I think the other big thing that we did is we looked at, so research in the post-quantum space is not standing still. So there are new optimizations even for those hash-based schemes. And we also looked at them, and we experimented with them and implemented them, and then looked at how much improvement we would get. So this gets us another 10-20% sometimes in terms of size compared to the already standardized hash-based signatures.
I see. And just to be clear, what you're talking about there with the 8,000 bytes, that's Sphinx Plus, yeah?
Yes.
And then
that's called Sphinx Plus, yeah.
And then this other type I've seen called Shrinks. Can you talk to us a little bit about Shrinks?
Yeah. So Shrinks is, I mean, it's a relatively straightforward idea. I'm not sure if we're the first one who had it, and it's one of the outcomes, I think, of this research as well. Maybe I need to take a step back and explain how hash-based signatures work. And for that, I first need to explain the concept of a one-time signature scheme. So one-time signature scheme allows you to create a public key, and then you can sign with a message with it, and you can verify the signature. But you can only sign a single message. If you sign 2 different messages, then an attacker will be able to forge a signature. So the way that hash-based signatures are then constructed out from one-time signatures is that you build this Merkle tree. Merkle tree, maybe people are familiar from it in Bitcoin, where you have sort of a long list of many one-time signature schemes. And then the first signature you produce, you use the first public key from the first one-time signature scheme. Then you use the second public key, then the third, and so on. This is essentially how a scheme works that is called XMSS, something extended Merkle, something signing scheme, I guess. And this has, compared to Sphinx, this has this big downside that it's so-called stateful. And this is a very kind of technical thing that probably have a hard time to get across. But what you see is when I say the first, you produce the first signature with your first one-time public key, the second with your second one-time public key, you need to remember that you've already signed with the first one, right? You have this counter that increases.
The premise is we don't want to re-sign again with that same key.
Yes.
Right?
And that is this.
Yeah, so just from your paper, XMSS, Extended Merkle Signature Scheme, just for the thing. But I guess what you're getting at is this idea of every Bitcoin, wallet, software, hardware would need some way of managing the state now to sort of remember, yes, I already signed with key 1, so don't use that one. Yes, I already signed with key 2, don't use that one. Use number 3 or whatever. But I guess it gets more complicated when we're talking about, I've already signed up to 7,987, signed with 7,988, and more complicated examples, right?
I think that wouldn't be a problem because computer takes care of large number. The problem is that you store the state in your wallet file, let's say on your disk, you produce a backup, you continue to use Bitcoin as normally, produce transactions, sign or whatever, and then your computer crashes, breaks down, you need to restore your backup, and then you're reusing that old state.
Now you could be in trouble, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And so that is the big problem.
Even like Lightning, this idea of if you try to sign with an old state, it's kind of sort of maybe loosely analogous there.
I think it's pretty similar, yeah.
Yeah, and so as I'm understanding, the idea of shrinks is you're doing a hybrid. It's in the happy path or the good case, you're doing stateful, and then you're having a stateless backup, but the cost of that is you're paying, or the transaction size is much larger. Is that?
Yes, that is right. But first, I have to say, so these one-time signatures, they are relatively small. So they are just 250 bytes, a single one of them.
Okay.
But we probably, so there's this potential thing we could do is we just deploy one-time signature scheme on Bitcoin, right? And I said that addresses shouldn't be reused, so just use this one-time signature scheme. But there are cases where you need multiple signatures, so that wouldn't be adequate. So we need multiple signatures. And what is also missing is that so far in the explanation is that you build this Merkle tree of public keys, and now anytime you want to sign for one of the leaves of this tree, you not only need to produce the signature, but you also need to produce a Merkle proof to show that this public key is included in the Merkle tree.
Okay, so that's also expanding the size of the transaction then.
Yes. So what we do then is we sort of optimize the layout of the tree such that the first public key is very near to the top. The second one is just below it. Third one is just below. So the more signatures you create, the more expensive it gets. But the advantage is that for the first signature, the cost is essentially just the cost of this one-time signature scheme. So just the one-time signature is pretty small, 270 bytes something. So that's what we use for the stateful part. Okay, so we could deploy that, but that still has the problem that you cannot at all produce a backup. That would always be insecure because or no static backup, I should say, right? So right now, like we do backups, we write down words on a piece of paper. That wouldn't be possible anymore, because anytime you would make a signature, you would have to update your piece of paper and add the counter to the paper. So that's impractical. So what we can do then, and that is shrinks, we combine the stateful scheme, which is very efficient, and the stateless scheme. Meaning that on the device where we have the state, we can use this optimized stateful signature scheme. But on a device where the seed has been imported that does not know the state, we would use the stateful scheme. So the stateful scheme is more costly. It's a larger size, like 3 to 4 kilobytes, depending on what exact scheme we choose. But at least it's possible to have a backup and recover from it. And in the optimal case, signatures are very small. So that is shrinks essentially. Big question is, even if we have this setup, are devices capable of holding state securely in that way? Let's say for hardware wallets, that seems to be possible, because hardware wallets, they don't give the user the ability to access the disk or whatever. For desktop wallets or mobile wallets, I am less certain about that, because like if you just write it to a file, as I said, the wallet file just doesn't work, because users will back it up,
right,
or
because they could lose that, or what some people do is they might have the same wallet loaded on like 2 different computers, or like one on a mobile, one on the computer, and then if they fall out of sync, and then again you run into that same problem of signing with, a key that you've already used before. In the stateful context, which is you could lose your money then. Yeah,
right. So in this entire space of trade-offs, shrinks is very optimal in terms of cost, but in terms of signature size, verification cost, signing cost, but you have this statefulness problem
to deal with. Okay, and so it would be like a new paradigm that people would have to manage, and maybe in certain contexts it could be managed, like maybe if it's like an always on lightning node or something like that, maybe maybe that in that context it might make sense, but then for like the deep cold multi-sig sort of thing, then maybe you need like the stateless backup in that case. And then the other aspect of it is, would we still have access to things like threshold multi-sig, right? So 2 of 3, 3 of 5, like we would still have that?
Yeah, so that was another question that we had when we started this paper, is all these nice advanced signature, or not signature, cryptographic schemes that we can use today from, what do we have? We have Taproot, we have music multi-signature, frost threshold signatures, we have silent payments, and we have
even like atomic submarine swaps and atomic payments, like atomic
adapter
swaps.
signatures. Yeah, adapter signatures will be one. So can we?
So these are all out the window in the quantum world, or at least in the hash-based world. In the hash-based world, those are out the window. Maybe in lattice-based signatures, is it different, or?
Yeah. So in lattice-based signatures, it's different. So so that was one of the results also for me, because I thought maybe there's a thing here or there that we could do that people in the academic community haven't looked at, because like few people look at what we are interested in Bitcoin. We found some tiny optimizations that are probably not worth the implementation complexity. So I would say that HD wallets, I have forgotten. HD wallets would also not really work in the way they do. So that doesn't work anymore. So that we lose some of the efficiency gains that we have had, or that we have right now with classical signature schemes. In the lattice world, since lattice, so hashes, you can just imagine they are these garbling machines that take the input and produce some like random looking output. And lattice-based signature schemes, they are based on an assumption, mathematical assumption, that has a lot more structure to it, more similar to what we're using today. And there exist somewhat equivalent things to multi-signatures and threshold signatures. They also have downsides compared to what we have today. But right now at Blockstream Research, we actually have a project looking into lattice-based signatures. Are they practical for Bitcoin? And are these advanced constructions like multi-signatures, threshold signatures, really practical?
Okay, yeah. So I guess maybe we'll have to talk about the lattice ones in another podcast once you do another paper for that one. So in the hash-based world, so let's just stay in hash-based world for now. There's a lot of things we're losing there, right? Like HD wallets, hierarchical deterministic wallets, this idea that you can easily input. So let's say right now today, if I make a cold card and I or whatever, I make an output descriptor and have a watch-only wallet and have like the computer able to generate new receiving addresses while keeping, let's say, the cold card or the hardware wallet somewhere else. We're kind of losing a bit of that, although maybe there's some other little bits and pieces you can sort of get. But yeah, as you said, a lot of the fancy crypto tricks that you and other guys have come up with, we would lose some of those. So, for example, even in the silent payments context, my understanding is, at least today with silent payments, people are computing a shared secret, and the hypothetical quantum adversary who sees he could recompute that shared secret and then go back and link the payments like historically. So that would be like maybe another example where the quantum adversary could like pwn you from a privacy perspective of knowing, oh, hey, this is Jonas's silent payments address. I know he took all these payments because I recomputed that shared secret using, hypothetically, the quantum computer. These are things we have to, I guess.
That is for sure a problem. That so generally these types of attacks are called, I think, store and decrypt later. Store now, decrypt later. Because
right.
What you could also do is right now you store all the web traffic and then later you decrypt everything that has not been moved to a post-quantum scheme. And in Bitcoin, you can do exactly the same thing.
Right.
I mean,
because everything's on chain in Bitcoin, right? So it's all there anyway.
Worse,
so you don't even have to store it. It's on the chain, right?
Yeah, right. And like Bitcoin also uses encryption on the peer-to-peer layer to protect against a global passive adversary that just listens to all connections, and that would also be affected by a quantum computer because it uses a very similar method to compute a shared secret that would also be vulnerable to a quantum computer. So an attacker that just stores all this data could also later decrypt it and maybe make use of it.
I see. Yeah, and so I guess this is there was like a point of contention in some of the online debates of people saying, oh, Bitcoin doesn't use encryption. What they mean there is more like in the public and private key cryptography, it's more like would you say you're using it more for authentication currently, not
yes.
encryption?
Yeah.
But there is encryption at the P2P level, which is another like a separate thing we're talking about, right?
There's also encryption on the Lightning Network, for example, that would be affected.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, there you go. That's another one. So I guess in the hash-based world of post-quantum cryptography, is Lightning like fine? Like, can we still do Lightning, but just in a different way?
So I don't think that people have really looked really deep into it, but I believe it's pretty straightforward that Lightning would work still. You would need to replace a cryptographic scheme here or there, and that has downsides. For example, size downsides. Your opening closing a channel will probably be more expensive, at least if you use hash-based signatures. But I don't see a reason why it would not work in principle.
I see. And then what was I going to say? So now one other thing that, like, as we were touching on this before, you were mentioning anything that relies on adapter signatures, we lose that because that relies on some like fancy crypto tweaking stuff, right? And one of the things that, as I understand, uses that is like submarine swaps and atomic swapping. So even things like cross-chain swapping, like things that like, let's say bolts.exchange or people who are doing like on-chain to off-chain swapping, to the thing that makes that atomic, isn't that the adapter signature? So I guess we would need some new form of that.
I mean, swaps can still work. the adapter signatures are really just an optimization to swaps that we could use.
To make it easier. Okay,
swaps,
so we could do some other form of swapping.
Yeah, the classical swaps, they actually just use a hash and a signature. And
Okay.
then the sort of advantage of adapter signatures was then, or is, that you don't need these twos. You don't need an extra hash, which is more efficient and also more private on-chain.
I see. Okay, so we don't lose like cross-chain swapping or atomic swapping per se. We would just have to like,
and
it would
also,
be like a new thing.
Since you brought up HD, we don't lose the entirety of HD. So from a single seed, you can still derive as many private keys as you want, and in a hierarchical way. You really just lose what you explained, which is you have a software wallet that has the XPub, and from the XPub, they can just by themselves generate new addresses and then scan for those addresses, scan the chain for those addresses.
Right, or what's known colloquially as a watch-only wallet nowadays.
Right.
We would kind of lose that aspect of it.
So how it would work then is that the hardware wallet would just pre-generate a lot of public keys or addresses and then send megabytes of public keys and addresses to the software wallet, and the software wallet can still be
would have to watch those addresses now.
But it's maybe at some point it doesn't have enough addresses, or it's out of addresses to look for, so it needs to ask the hardware wallet.
So we'd have to have a setup where like maybe it does like 100 addresses on your computer that you can watch, and then once you've hit your 100, okay, now go back down there, get your hardware wallet out, generate the next 100 addresses, and give that back to the software wallet to do the watch only. Part of it.
I mean, addresses or public keys, they're pretty small, so it would be easy to use more than just 100.
Okay,
right?
So it could be like thousands or something.
Yeah. I mean, you can store some megabytes of public keys, I guess, on your software wallet without any issues.
But I guess another obvious corollary is we're going to need new hardware wallets, right? We're going to need, because a lot of hardware wallets now, for security reasons, are intentionally underpowered. And I think, like some of the hardware wallet makers have said that the reason is for security purposes. So that's like another thing of like, what are we going to do about the security of hardware wallets in the post-quantum world? Yeah,
that is another interesting dimension. So far, we've only really talked about signature size, but really another aspect is how long does it take?
Computational capacity.
How long does it take to produce a signature? And on regular hardware wallets, I believe it's depending on what kind of hardware wallet. I mean, there are multiple types, but like with these relatively low-powered devices that are not smart cards, but low-powered CPUs, it would take maybe 2 minutes to produce a single Sphinx plus signature. So that is
that's
not great.
Bit of a downside too. Yeah,
but they can deal with it, which I think is kind of is good news. And I suppose once people actually want to produce those signatures, then hardware wallet manufacturers, they can ship and sell hardware that is specifically designed for hash-based signatures. So they could have some extra hardware that is just very good at computing those hashes to get those numbers down. So I think that is a realistic possibility.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
The other aspect is verification time. Right, there's not just signing time, there's also verification time. Verification time affects all nodes because they need to verify the blockchain, including the signatures. And we don't want verification time to go up by too much, because in general, we want that nodes should not running a node shouldn't require enormous resources for decentralization, etc. And those hash-based signatures, verifying a single hash-based signature is more expensive than verifying the Schnorr signatures.
So in the shrinks, let's say, paradigm, do you know like roughly how much? Is it like a 5x more, 10x more? Like, do you have a rough idea?
Oh, I would think in the shrinks paradigm, if they use the optimized path, so if you have the state and everything, then it should be the verification cost should be comparable to Schnorr
like what we use today.
Shouldn't be a big difference. If they have to use the stateful path, then I think maybe maybe 50 times more expensive.
50 times.
Yeah, but
Okay.
it's also much larger. So per byte, so it's also much larger.
Oh, okay, I get you. Because
the cost is about the same.
oh, I see. Yeah. So because then, like, if a typical Bitcoin block today, I don't know the average, but call it 2 megs or 1.8 megs or something like that range. And then I guess I mean, while we're here, let's talk a bit about the block size aspect of this, because just for example's sake, let's say we as a community, we all agreed on shrinks, and we said, okay, we're doing shrinks. As you said, it's like what, 270 bytes or something.
Yep, in the best case.
So we're talking like maybe 5 or 6x what a current signature size is.
Yes. So 64 bytes is the current signature size. Yeah, it would be 4 to 5 times.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say like 5x. Does that mean, kind of loosely speaking, we're taking, if we keep the block size the same, like 4 million weight units, etc., does that mean we're going to have like approximately 1/5 the capacity for transactions, like loosely?
I don't think so, because there's also other parts of the transactions, right, that don't change. So it really only changed the signature part. So I would expect.
Gotcha. But it's a signature is one of the bigger parts of the transaction, right?
Yeah, it would become the big. Well, we have these transaction outputs. They are large. Inputs referencing previous outputs, so they are all pretty large, and they are not affected by the witness discount. So I haven't run the numbers. It should be pretty easy to run the numbers, but it would be. I think we would be able to support between a half of the 50% of the transactions that we have right now and 100% somewhere in that range.
Okay, so it's not like
25.
a crazy downgrade, but it's gonna. And to be fair, that's also in the stateful case, because if there's a lot of people who are doing the stateless size of transaction, then we're really losing a lot of our transaction capacity per block. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. That is correct.
Because those stateless ones are much big, as you said. They're like 8 kilobytes or something like that, right?
Yeah, 4 kilobytes if we use the optimized ones that we discuss in the paper.
Okay.
But if the block size stays the same, then the verification cost per block will also stay roughly the same to what we have today.
Oh, okay. So that could be, yeah. And so I guess that's the other thing. The community, obviously, that was very controversial in the 2015 to 2017 era, the block size wars. Do you think the community should reopen that conversation around quantum and say, well, if we're going to come out with shrinks, are we going to raise the block size again to compensate for that? Like, does that mean we go to like, I don't know, 8 million weight units? Or what do you like? Do you think that is, I guess, obviously I understand this could be a controversial thing, but do you think it is worthwhile to talk about?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's worthwhile to talk about. I mean, the environment is always changing that Bitcoin operates in. And therefore Bitcoin must adapt in any way. Anyway, the question is, what is the risk of trying to find consensus on a new block size, and can that even be done? I think it can, maybe with some arguments, but yeah, I think we should. It makes sense to talk about it, but in terms of exact sizes or something, I think that's way too early right now.
I see. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, just do you? I guess here's the other question. In terms of efficiency and optimizations, as you mentioned, there are still researchers finding optimizations. Obviously, you and others are looking at Bitcoin-focused optimizations. Like, where are we in that, let's say, curve or cycle? Like, do you think there's some more optimizations to come, or are we sort of, like even in Bitcoin land, like the ASICs that we got, like there was in those first few years of ASICs, there was like a pretty big improvement, and then after a while, like the improvements slowed down a bit. Do you have a sense of what that is in post-quantum crypto for Bitcoin?
It's almost as hard as giving an estimate for a quantum computer, right? These timelines for technology are just difficult. I don't really expect a breakthrough in hash-based signatures. Lattice-based signatures, they have a long history already, so it's pretty hard to get up to speed with the current state-of-the-art schemes, because they just use so many tricks. would expect there's something there. For example, signature aggregation, which is a super interesting topic. Now, right now, we've only talked about essentially using the Bitcoin the same way as we do today. But you could also imagine that instead of just like right now, right, we have a signature per coin that we're spending. And signature aggregation would mean that we would instead have a single signature for a single transaction that just authorizes all of the coins that are spent in the transaction. So using Bitcoin different than we do today. That would be an option if this aggregate signature in the end would be much smaller than the sum of the individual signatures. In hash-based signature schemes, unfortunately, not really possible. In lattice-based signature schemes, maybe I haven't seen a signature aggregation, or there exist signature aggregation schemes, but I think there's more there for sure to be explored. And then maybe if we only have a signature per transaction that is relatively large, but somehow we're able to all
we're kind of amortizing it across a lot of a lot of inputs going into that transaction, let's say.
Produce transactions collaboratively, then maybe that would also get rid of some of those problems with the large signatures. And also, one other aspect is that it's not really an either or hash-based signatures or lattice-based signatures. Also possible to use to implement both. For the Bitcoin protocol. Obviously, also comes with downsides, additional complexity, maintenance cost. It has some, it reduces privacy a little bit because then you have wallets that only support hash-based signatures, others only support.
There could be like fingerprinting based on which one you use.
Yeah. So another possibility in this big space of options.
Yeah. But perhaps that's also part of the challenge is that there's such a wide, let's say, design space of what's theoretically possible. Does that make it hard for us as a quote-unquote Bitcoin community, node runners, whatever you want to call us, whatever, people who are doing Bitcoin stuff and actually take it seriously, to come to agreement on something, right? Because we have to be able to agree on, so maybe it's sort of like, what is the minimum viable thing that we can all agree on and say, yeah, that's the path forward?
Yeah, right. I mean, that is... in an ideal world, I guess that wouldn't be the case because at some point we would just use one of the schemes or whatever, and that's better than having nothing, which I think is possible in an emergency situation. In an emergency situation, we could use Sphinx Plus as standardized tomorrow, and I think it wouldn't be that hard to get consensus on it if there was a real risk, although it's always hard to estimate what the risk is. But yeah, I think that will be a huge challenge potentially to agree on one of those schemes, just because the space of options is just enormous, and all of them affect Bitcoin users in one way or another.
Yeah,
that is the
and
big
then
problem.
Even with multiple schemes, does that create additional verification costs, or would you just see it like, well, we're still bounded by block size, and therefore that's kind of like the real limiter, the rate limiter in terms of people, just putting in like transactions, because as I'm sure you are more aware of this than I am, but historically there have been bugs or things that related, or let's say vulnerabilities that related to people who could craft a malicious transaction or a malicious block that takes a very long time for like a low power device or even a standard power device to actually validate. And then that became like, is that a DOS vector,
I mean, I don't really think that would be the case for these kinds of signatures, because you just run the verification algorithm and it usually doesn't have any additional randomness or something, or it should have a pretty clear upper bound how long it takes to run. But I think it's always a risk to introduce new stuff to Bitcoin, especially if it's as complex as a new signature scheme. So one of the advantages of using a standardized scheme, for example, is that good implementations already exist. They haven't been written for a consensus system like Bitcoin, which is its own challenge, but they have been very well written and they are being used in production. So in principle, it wouldn't be unthinkable to just pick one of them. And when I say they are not optimized for consensus system, is that in Bitcoin, we have this additional challenge, which usual cryptographic libraries don't have, is that we need to have this sort of backward compatibility when releasing a new version. So a signature that is valid with one version shouldn't become invalid with the next version, or even worse, the other way around. A signature that was invalid will become valid. Usually, that's not such a big deal if you're just signing software or use it for the web. But in Bitcoin, this could result in chain splits and consensus failure. So that is an additional risk that you get when introducing complex additional schemes to Bitcoin.
Yeah. So summarizing then, Sphinx Plus is the, let's say, more standardized, like in the NIST, NIST, and in that world, it's kind of standardized and it's stateless. But the downside is it's very large. It's like 8 kilobytes, which is massive in Bitcoin transaction land. But the, let's say, Bitcoin optimized version that you and others are working on is Shrinks. And what would be required for that to become, like, does it just need like more review and research for people to sort of come together and agree, okay, we think Shrinks is a good Bitcoin optimized form of Sphinx Plus, or what?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that Shrinks is our main proposal. I mean, in the paper, what we're doing, we're looking mainly at variants of Sphinx, and one of the results that we have is a Python script where you can play around with different parameters, and it will then output the cost in terms of size and verification and signing time.
I see.
And even there, if you just look at that, it's also quite difficult to just pick one scheme. So one of the open questions was, for example, how does it behave with hardware wallets? Although I think that's not such a big deal right now, because in the future we could have hardware acceleration for doing fast hashes. In terms of Shrinks, the question is, I think, hardware wallet manufacturers, do they think they can keep state securely? So that would be an interesting sort of input that we're looking for.
Yeah, right. And because you can imagine there might be failure cases where, like a device can brick and then you need to recover, or like maybe could that be like a vector for attackers, like security hackers who are like, they try to play with things like power analysis of like turn it off and on, or do things to kind of mess with the device to try to make it do something different. And in that process, could you lose your state from that? I don't know. But maybe that's like a more of a extreme case that maybe the hardware wallet manufacturers don't build for that because they're just building for the standard case. But I guess it is a security consideration, right? Yeah. Nevertheless.
But one of the major pushbacks that we got for this work, which I think makes sense from perspective, is just that why don't you just use the standardized version, because that has already these libraries and it will have support by Apple or whatever, and by HSM manufacturers and so on. Why would you invent your own thing for Bitcoin? And the answer to that, I think, is just that I think the limited resource is really the resources, the verification resources that and network bandwidth that we have on our nodes. And if we can reduce the signature size by 50%, I think that's pretty significant. And I hope the limit is not designing the secure libraries and writing standards. Sure, that is very resource intensive, but I feel like the sort of resources on the nodes are the more significant limit than our manpower to solve these problems and write good code.
I see. Yeah. And as you said, coming back to the whole block size and controversiality, or how controversial that could be, if we're talking about like 8 kilobytes or 4 kilobytes even, that's massive from a Bitcoin transaction. Like from, can you give people a sense that like transactions today are more like a few hundred bytes, right?
Yep.
So this would be like a very big decrease in our capacity, unless we also pair it with, okay, we did Sphinx plus quite a substantial block size increase, which would also be very controversial and I don't know, hard to say. Maybe it's unlikely to be accepted, like a very big block size increase, like a 5x or a 10x block size increase.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and lattice-based signatures, for example, they are also pretty large. So they would be in the 3 to 4 kilobyte range. So shrinks, if statefulness works, is actually the smallest post-quantum signature scheme outside of like schemes that rely on more crazy mathematical assumptions,
like novel cryptographic assumptions kind of territory. Okay. Now, in terms of, I know this wasn't like part of your paper, but obviously, given your depth of work and knowledge of Bitcoin, can you talk to us a little bit about what a transition might look like? Is it like, something like BIP360, and then people have to like spend out of their old, outputs into the new quantum resistant outputs? I know there are different ideas around that also. Like some people have this idea of having like, I think it was Maccarello was talking about this idea, or maybe it was his idea of like having, what if you had people having like a Taproot script path with their quantum resistant thing in there, and you keep using the key path for now, and then once hypothetical Q day comes and the quantum computer is confirmed, at that point you would have to disable the key path and then only have script path. But this might enable like a gradual transition. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts to share on that transition aspect?
Yeah. So right. So there's BIP360, and BIP360 has evolved quite a lot since it was first proposed. And what it does is it allows you to send your coins, essentially lock them just by a Taproot Merkle tree. So it's very similar to Taproot, except that you have no key spent path. So you just have essentially the Merkle root, which is a hash in the output. And then if you want to spend, you need to reveal one of those leaves in this Merkle root, which then gives you the spending conditions, and then you need to provide a signature for that. BIP360 by itself does not provide quantum security, only against long exposure attacks, because it does not propose a post-quantum signature scheme. So that is one possibility. The downside of that is that if people would move to BIP360, then they would lose all of the performance gains that we got with Taproot in the first place, essentially. Not all of them still have the Merkle tree, but you couldn't do any, like the key spend path was just more efficient than using the Merkle tree to spend, and you had music, frost, etc.
We would lose all
directly on the key spend path, so we lose that. But it's a possibility. 360 is not complete, as I said, but sure, that is a possibility. And another possibility is what you mentioned, this idea popularized by Matt Corello. Unfortunately, it does not have a snappy name or BIP associated with it, so I'm struggling to find a good name for it. But I think it's another viable approach where you just use Taproot as is right now, and then only once the quantum computer appearance becomes imminent, you disable the key path. And that means that you need to have some fallback always in the script path, such that once the key path is disabled, you can still spend your coin using a script path. And though this script path could also then use some post-quantum signature scheme opcode that might be eventually introduced in Bitcoin. The advantage of that is you can use all the Taproot features until Q-day comes.
I see. Yeah. So I guess there's different options on exactly how the community goes about this upgrade. Coming back to what we were saying before, it's going to be sort of a challenge of getting everyone to coordinate on exactly what we're doing and when, and will there be multiple soft forks required, right? So I guess just talking it out, you tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but as an example, one way could be maybe if BIP360 was sort of paired with like one of these schemes, whether it's Sphinx Plus or Shrinks or something, and then it would just be like one soft fork to get that in, or it might be two soft forks if there's like one for bit 360 and another to sort of bring in the particular scheme. And then there might even be, again, controversial, but there might be another one around burning, Satoshi's coins or the vulnerable coins per se. Maybe it's not really accurate or precise to just say, oh yeah, Satoshi's coins, but the quantum vulnerable coins might end up getting burned or frozen in some way. And of course, there'll be arguments about that too, because there'll be some who say, well, you should never seize coins, and it's better to quote unquote let the chips fall where they may on those vulnerable coins.
I think that will actually be the much bigger discussion that might have quite an impact on the Bitcoin space. Right. And even lead to a split. Yeah.
And so I guess in such a scenario, there could even be if it really gets extreme, there could be like an intentional chain split. And just like we saw in the 2017 kind of SegWit 2x and block size wars, in the SegWit 2x case, Bitfinex literally had B1x and B2x, and people were trading one token against the other. And so maybe in that world, there would be like kind of the burn vulnerable coins fork, and then the no burning, let the chips fall where they may fork. Yep. And they may even trade against each other. And so in that scenario, I guess, hypothetically, if you want to be safe, you just kind of sit and hold both sides of the fork and sort of wait for the dust to settle, and then be like, okay, well, that's the true Bitcoin. This is the one that won.
Or it can become permanent.
Yeah. Or just like a permanent chain fork split, and, like Bcash and BSV and whatever, like they just... But I think in practice, one of the sides would probably win, and then that would be quote unquote the real Bitcoin. But who knows?
Yeah, I guess so too.
Yeah. Anything else on like transition aspects? I mean, what about the time? Like people have tried to estimate, okay, is it going to be like half a year or years worth of time? Like just literally the packing people's transactions in to get, from the old, the current scheme today into the quantum resistant or quantum secure scheme. That itself could take time depending on if we have a block size increase or not, or whatever, or the size of the scheme, the new scheme.
That's actually a good question. I haven't run the numbers on that. I don't know, but that's a good question. Like the minimum of time you need, assuming everyone would migrate, or at least most of them.
Right. And is it going to be like chaos and cacophony of like some people are like putting through transactions at like crazy high because they want to get through first and make sure their stuff is safe? I mean, who knows what could happen there?
So that is one of the advantages of the Matt Corello Taproot approach, if you want to call it like that. It's just that you could start to use this today.
It's a gradual transition,
Just add an additional Merkle path to your Taproot tree with a post-quantum signature scheme. Okay, assuming this was deployed, and then you can use your wallet as
normal today until hypothetical Q day, and you kind of burn the key path.
So that would be a pretty gradual approach.
Yeah, so
but of course we never know how many people have actually migrated in that.
Yeah, and then that's the other problem as well of like today there are millions of coins vulnerable, and I guess obviously step one is, hey guys, like don't reuse addresses, like learn to you don't do that. And I guess and that's the other thing. If it's like a sudden thing or it's a gradual break in the quantum side, like in terms of quantum computing coming, because if it's a gradual thing, then you would expect over time that 6 million coins that's currently vulnerable, a lot of those people will start transitioning out of the reused addresses and out of the vulnerable addresses, at least if they still have the keys. Like maybe Satoshi's dead, who knows? So maybe those coins don't. But the other, like a lot of the other coins should transition, and at least any professionally managed coins would, right? Because that's the other thing. It's a bit of a misnomer that people think, oh, Satoshi has 1 million coins. Really what that is this quote unquote Patoshi mining pattern, and they're stored in many outputs. So it's not that the quantum computer is just going to do like one round of hacking and just get like 1 million coins. It's like they would have to go through each of those. The bigger juicy targets would be the custodians who have like, like 50,000 coins or 100,000 coins on one, like in one UTXO. That would be the real juicy target for a quantum hacker per se.
Right. So, and I think this view that quantum computer comes gradually or at one point in time is very idealistic, because we will never know, and there will be a lot of uncertainty that we can get into the quantum computing war games that Project 11 has written about. It's pretty interesting, but it seems to be more realistic to me that we will have a lot of uncertainty and it will be very messy in quantum computers, and there might even be also a lot of FUD, and people can financially take advantage by using that FUD and claiming they have broken a Bitcoin public key or something like that, but they haven't, but they can fake it convincingly. So yeah, even though I work on this post-quantum thing, ideally it wouldn't happen, because then I don't need to be involved in all those discussions regarding the switch to post-quantum stuff.
Yeah, so it's going to be a challenging thing. So I guess my gut feel is we're probably going to have to look at what is the sort of minimum viable, what is the minimal thing that everyone can just kind of more easily agree on, or what's like the sort of quote unquote Schelling point that we can all come to and say, yeah, that's the, maybe that ends up being like, okay, BIP 360 and some particular scheme, whether it's Sphinx Plus or Shrinks Plus, and just let the chips fall where they may, right? Like, it's your responsibility. Okay, it's like, here's your quantum secure thing. If you want it, use it. Or if you're a quantum denier, don't use it, and let the chips fall where they may. No freezing, no burning. Just, that's it. Maybe that's like the minimal sort of thing. But even that, are we going to do a block size increase for that? Like, to compensate for the loss of transactional capacity? Don't know.
Or our layer 2s and rollups and arcs are good enough to just deal with this.
Right, to just take 50% less transactional capacity, or even less, or something. Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of hypotheticals. Really hard to project this into the future.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. But at least I thank you for doing this research, and at least helping us understand it a little bit better. Any other, anything else you think we didn't cover that you really think we should talk about?
I think we covered pretty much everything. So if you want to read the paper, I'm wondering where to best find it.
I'll put the links in the show notes, so don't worry about that. So I will link that in the show notes. Of course, guys, follow Jonas. Your handle is Nickler, right? N1CKLER, just off the top of my head. I think that's the one. So of course, guys, follow Jonas. Keep up to date on what's happening here. I guess we'll leave it at that. So thank you very much for coming on the show and helping keep us educated on this. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.